Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're stepping away from the sunlit world of kings, political treaties, and those big surface-level empires, and we're plunging into a much more visceral, hidden reality. We are going to completely reconstruct an entire human world buried deep beneath the earth. It's a world that literally fueled the mighty Industrial Revolution, yet demanded an unimaginable price from the men, women, and children who lived within it. So get ready for a deep historical immersion into the grueling everyday life of the 19th century British coal miner. I want you to imagine, just for a second, the profound sensory deprivation of a child. We're talking about kids as young as 5 years old. Picture them sitting at the absolute bottom of a mine shaft for 12 hours a day, completely enveloped in pitch-black darkness. They were terrified, of course, but entirely forbidden to use tallow candles. Why? Well, partly because of the sheer expense, but mostly due to the constant, lingering danger of explosive gases. So they just sat there, listening to the dripping of water, the terrifying creaking of the timber holding the earth up, and the distant rumble of coal wagons. And this wasn't a nightmare. This was just a typical Tuesday for the youngest workers in the Victorian pit.
Okay, let's dive into this subterranean empire.
To really wrap our heads around this underground world, we first have to look at its brutal geography, because nature is not accommodating. The geological constraints of the British coalfields absolutely dictated the grueling conditions of survival down there. In places like the Denby mine, coal seams could be extraordinarily thin. We're talking as thin as 10 inches. And to minimize the non-productive cost of cutting away solid stone just to make higher roads, colliery owners forced gates to be cut at a mere 26 inches high. This spatial reality meant adult miners were forced to hew coal while lying flat on their sides or kneeling in freezing water. And tragically, it necessitated the relentless labor of the absolute smallest children, simply because no one else could physically fit into those tiny extraction zones.
The underground labor hierarchy.
Now, what's really interesting about this breakdown is how violently and systematically this subterranean society was structured by age and gender. Right at the top of the hierarchy, you had the adult male hewers. They're the ones actually cutting the coal. Beneath them were the hurriers, who were often older children and adolescents, literally dragging the heavy coal tubs. And at the very bottom, the trappers. Those were the 5 to 10-year-old children manning the heavy ventilation doors alone in the dark. The wages also reflect a pretty stark reality. Female workers who prior to 1842 were working underground in conditions identical to the men were paid less than half of what the men received for the exact same backbreaking physical labor. To ground all that demographic data in the raw physical suffering of the era, we just have to look at the historical record. Listen to this absolutely harrowing eyewitness account from Betty Harris. She was a 37-year-old female hurrier, and she testified to parliamentary commissioners with these words. "I have a belt round my waist and a chain passing between my legs, and I go on my hands and feet. I have drawn till I have had the skin off me." She pulled these incredibly heavy coal wagons through steep, flooded tunnels where the freezing water often reached her thighs. This was the raw, bodily reality of the great industrial engine. But here is where we encounter a staggering, almost unbelievable disconnect between Victorian morality and subterranean reality. Down in the deep pits, the heat was stifling, just completely unbearable. Because of this, women like Betty often worked stripped to the waist, wearing trousers out of sheer, absolute practical necessity. But when middle-class reformers up on the surface discovered this, well, Victorian society was shockingly far more outraged by their lack of clothing, terrified that it invited promiscuity and made them unfit to be mothers, than they were by the lethal danger and the crushed bones these women were enduring every single shift. Economics, scrip, and debt. And the horrors really didn't end at the pit mouth. Once they were back above ground, miners faced something called the truck system. This was a monopolistic practice where workers were not actually paid in conventional cash. Instead, they were paid in tokens or company scrip. Now, this scrip was entirely worthless outside the colliery. It was only redeemable at the colliery owner's own store, known as a Tommy shop. These company-owned stores routinely marked up the prices of low-quality, often stale food by 20 to 30%, effectively trapping entire mining families in a perpetual, inescapable cycle of debt and dependency. So the crucial point is this. Modern assumptions often suggest miners were relatively well paid compared to, say, agricultural workers.
And sure, on paper, a hewer earning 15 to 35 shillings a week looked pretty prosperous for the time. But that prosperity, it was a devastating illusion. The real purchasing power was systematically hollowed out. Between those massive Tommy shop markups, predatory 5% poundage fees charged on any cash advances, and living in colliery-owned, tied cottages where a simple strike or a bad illness meant immediate eviction for your whole family, the miners' supposedly high wage was entirely precarious. Actually, just earning that illusory wage in the first place was incredibly difficult. Miners were universally paid by the piece. A family would attach a little embossed iron tag, called a madi, to their filled coal tub to claim payment for their work. But when that tub finally reached the surface, a company weighman inspected it. If he decided it contained too much stone or small slack coal, the entire tub was confiscated. Just like that, hours of grueling, life-threatening labor could vanish in an instant without a single penny of pay.
Disease, disaster, and death. The looming threat of debt paled in comparison to the sheer physical toll this industry took on the human body. Literally every breath taken underground was a hazard. Chronic inhalation of thick coal dust led to coal workers' pneumoconiosis, which the men simply called miner's asthma or black lung. The pathological reality of this was horrifying. You're talking about coughing up thick black spit, progressive massive fibrosis, emphysema, and inevitable early death. Yet for decades, colliery owners and even the medical establishment dismissed this glaring occupational disease as mere constitutional weakness, completely refusing to acknowledge the deadly nature of the dust itself. Let's look at how this builds, because these daily occupational hazards were constantly compounded by sudden, catastrophic loss. It took a timeline of reform forged entirely in blood to force parliamentary action. For instance, in 1838, a horrific Yorkshire flood drowned 26 children. That finally sparked a public outcry, leading to the 1842 Mines Act, which banned women and children under 10 from working underground. But the disasters absolutely continued. It actually took the 1862 Hartley Pit catastrophe for the law to finally mandate the most basic safety feature imaginable, having multiple mine shafts. 204. That is the number of men and boys who suffocated to death in that Hartley colliery disaster. The mine relied on just a single shaft. When a massive 20-ton iron engine beam snapped and crashed down the opening, it completely sealed the men below in toxic gas and suffocating darkness. Despite truly heroic rescue efforts over several days, 204 souls perished, all because the owner hadn't wanted to spend the money to build a secondary escape route.
Community, faith, and solidarity.
Yet if we only look at the horrors of the pit, we really miss the profound resilience of these people. Ask yourself, in a brutal world completely devoid of state welfare, surrounded by hostile employers and constant looming danger, how did these working-class families avoid complete collapse when a breadwinner was crushed or suffocated? Well, the answer is that they built grassroots safety nets entirely by themselves. Methodism swept through the coalfields, offering a heavily neglected people a sense of spiritual dignity, moral discipline, and egalitarian brotherhood. And right alongside the chapel, they formed friendly societies, groups like the Oddfellows and Foresters. Men would pool together pennies from their already meager wages to create a collective fund. So if a miner was sick or injured, he received a sick allowance of 8 to 10 shillings a week. It wasn't much, but it preserved his dignity and saved his family from the dreaded workhouse. This kind of mutual aid literally laid the foundation for early trade unions. And this brilliantly illustrates how the shared trauma of the subterranean empire forged a unified, virtually unbreakable working-class culture. The cultural memory of the chapel, the communal singing, the powerful sermons, the fierce solidarity, none of that stayed underground. It echoed through generations, profoundly shaping the modern labor movement. And you can still see its vibrant legacy today in massive, proud gatherings like the Durham Miners' Gala. So, as we finally step back into the light of the present day, we really have to look around at our modern industrial world. We built this world of steel and steam on their broken backs, on their confiscated bodies, and on their suffocated lungs. But have we truly reckoned with the staggering human price they paid in the darkness? It's a question worth keeping with you long after this explainer ends.